We're going live right now. And if you have just joined us, welcome. I still can't see that we have. Okay, so I think we're live now. Welcome to Migraine Canada's Ask Your Pharmacist. It's a series of live webinars that aim to bring subjects that are not usually brought through, the webinars that we usually do that are mostly about medications and about the condition. We would like to talk to you today about a subject that is that we get a lot of questions around the brain of people living with migraine. And it gives me great pleasure to have Dr. Crystal Kahler. And Dr. Crystal is the founder of the Virtual Brain Center. She's a doctor of behavioral health, a social gerontologist, and a senior Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health with Global Brain Health Institute at Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, where she completed her residency training on dementia prevention and social determinants of brain health. Crystal has held executive level positions with health nonprofit organizations, has over a decade of wellness program experience, receiving multiple awards for innovation and community impact, and has over 15 years of experience working with individuals with brain health concerns, their families, and advocacy organizations. The subject itself is of great, I think, importance to all of us, not only people living with migraine. For you, Dr. Kaller, can I call you Crystal? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Crystal, great. Thank you.
Welcome to Migraine Canada. Thank you for joining us. You are joining us tonight from New York, where you are based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So welcome to Migraine
Thank
Canada,
you.
and thank you for being our guest tonight.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the lovely introduction and the time to spend with the community this evening to talk about all things brain health and migraine health.
Thank you. I'm getting some. I'm getting someone telling me that there's no audio. If someone is watching us, uh, can you tell us if you can hear us, or if we're having issues with the audio? I've just got a message on our chat saying there's no audio. Okay. I'm assuming we should be okay. If you're having an issue with the audio, we are also streaming on Facebook, on Migraine Canada Facebook page, and on the Virtual Brain Health Center that is on LinkedIn, and on my own, the Migraine Pharmacist Facebook. So it looks like it's okay now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Perveen. Welcome everybody. And I think the first thing that made this an important subject for us is that we're all worried about our brain health. That's the number one worry, I guess, we all have around cognition, especially when we age, when we go through tough periods in our life, or when we live with a condition. And migraine is one of these conditions where people living with migraine are exposed to multiple painful episodes, and that go on for years or for most of their lives. They are exposed to different medications, and they always ask, well, like, can I take this long term? What will it do to me? What about dementia? What about cognition? And a lot of the medications that do give these side effects are very worrisome for them. So I guess that's your area, and that's why we thought it would be a great idea to talk to you today and to hear from you about this subject. Would you
No,
like?
that's great. Would you like to put up the slide deck and
Yeah,
we'll see
yeah.
that here. I think you covered everything so lovely in the introduction of the importance of brain health and really what we see in surveys all across the world, especially as we go down the aging care continuum, is brain health is one of the top health concerns that people have. But then we also report we don't know what to do about it. So there's a lot of information out there. We're not sure how to access the information or how really to make these things relevant to our daily lives. So I'm hoping that's what may have piqued a few people's interest, at least that may be joining us this evening, and that we can dive into. But I do like to share a little bit about myself before I do a talk. I appreciate your lovely introduction, but my approach and perspective to brain health does look a little different, I think, like everyone else's. I did train in the social sciences, but it was actually in graduate school. I had an isolated seizure event. And I think I share the story of many people who live with new daily persistent headache. You can pinpoint that exact moment in time when that headache started and has never stopped. And that's been about a decade long for me. And then as life has progressed, deal with chronic migraine and across the lifespan too. And so realizing that living with migraine, chronic migraine, new daily persistent headache, I've trained in the brain health field, but it's also my personal interest as I have to take up this charge every day for my own health and well being, as well as in the work and projects I do to support others. So I hope that shares a little bit of insights on the perspective that I may have when I'm chatting with you this evening about brain health and wellness, as well as migraine health. It's we've done some training in it, but also it's been my personal journey and story and getting trained up in advocacy. So I am so grateful to Migraine Canada to be with you this evening. We talked about a few questions that we were hoping to cover tonight. I'm not sure if maybe one of them piqued your interest, perhaps more than one for why you're here. But there's the chat that we have. So feel free. And at any point in time, there's a comment, a scenario, something you'd like to share, put it in the chat and we'll make sure to address those questions as we go along too. But it seems like we picked the big ones of how do brains age with migraine disease or without migraine disease? Is it the same? Is it different? Do people living with migraine disease or related headache disorders have to have different strategies to maintain brain health? And what do they need to do? And as well as at the end, I think this is where Heba's expertise comes into. But what do we really know about brain fog and some of the medications that are very commonly prescribed for people part of our migraine and headache community? So I want to start off today with just defining what brain health is. And it's really been a topic that's been coming online in recent years, gaining popularity, but it's also one where I can share the field has shifted its perspective. So initially, we thought of brain health in terms of cognitive functioning and output, meaning what can our brain do and how does it perform? Thinking about your mental processes, your cognition, how you learn, your judgment, language, and remember. So there's multiple definitions out from different leading organizations. I included ones from the CDC and Administration on Community Living because they tend to be a little short and sweet. And I think highlight what it is we mean by the cognitive activities we're asking our brains to perform when we're looking under that brain health umbrella and definition. And historically in our field, our perspective of brain health was different. We thought brain health was for people who were very healthy. And so a lot of times we excluded populations like older adults, people with brain-based diseases, those living with migraine or headache. It wasn't necessarily we thought that brain health is an important part of their care and treatment. Historically, we looked at brain health as this achievable goal of the healthy wanting to achieve and attain. I can say in the past few years, we have changed this perspective as a field across the globe for the most part, if you're living in an area where they define brain health as part of their vocabulary. But the nice part is now good brain health is a state that every individual, so every single one of us, can realize our own abilities to optimize our cognitive, emotional, psychological, and behavioral functioning. So you can see how that definition has really expanded to hit large domains of our wellness and our lifestyle. And we look at how that plays a role in how we cope with situations. And really, from my experience in the field, the way I've looked at brain health and have really approached it, changing on training under the lifespan perspective, as well as spending a lot of time working with people with a wide variety of brain-based diseases, it's really coming down to our brain's ability to thrive at any age. And the bulk of that is through our lifestyle. So we say now brain health is about 90% lifestyle and 10% genetics. So there are many things we can do that can help nurture our brains and our bodies to do better, and that will look different for all of us. But I wanted to at least start off the talk this evening on defining what all falls under this brain health umbrella before we spend the bulk of our time chatting about that this evening. I'm not sure if I saw any comments come through just yet, but I know the first main question we wanted to chat about this evening is, do brains of people living with migraine disease age differently? The answer of what we are finding is no, we don't age differently. It may look different for us. And so we're starting to see some smaller studies, in terms of small, I want to say the amount of studies available on what happens to people who are aging with migraine disease. We know the trajectory of migraine disease and related headache disorders looks different across the aging care continuum. And we sometimes see a decrease or people reporting less frequency of their headaches as we are aging. So we kind of see these different fluctuations in our headache frequency or migraine episode frequency with aging, but it doesn't necessarily accelerate our brain aging process. Migraine has yet to have a relationship with damaging brain cells. And there's really no long-term damage that we see. We know migraine disease can ebb and flow. It's very painful for a lot of people, but that pain isn't necessarily causing long-term or lasting damage to our aging brain. So I hope that gives us a little bit of information of what we know that the field has found out so far. On the other hand, what we know about people who live with migraine disease is we tend to talk about more of those cognitive functions more commonly with our healthcare providers. And we do that when we're younger as well as when we're older. So what we call that is our subjective experiences of our cognition is we're open with those conversations. We entertain that dialogue, and we know it's an important part of our level of awareness in driving our own optimal health and well-being. And we find that we are different as a community in comparison to other people who may be aging without migraine disease. They're not necessarily bringing to the forefront some of those cognitive concerns they may have. But in terms of general brain aging, we're aging all the same, started in about our mid-20s, just depending on the different processes, it does ebb and flow. And the last part on this slide, in terms of migraine being related as a dementia risk factor, is really getting a few studies. I think what I could find was maybe 5 to 8 studies that start to talk about the relationship between migraine disease and the possibility of a diagnosis of dementia later on in life. And most of what we talk about in the brain health field are established lifestyle risk factors that we know contribute to dementia. And what we know right now for migraine and dementia is somehow there's a relationship. We're not really sure what it is. So sometimes in some of the studies, it shows it can be a potential risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and dementia later down the lifespan, or we've seen that it starts to come online in midlife, which depending on studies, what you're looking at, probably your late 40s to your 50s is where they're looking at midlife trajectories and saying that we might be at a slightly heightened risk, but we're not sure why. We know the mechanisms look different for migraine and dementia in the brain. We're not sure what the pathophysiology is. We're not sure that there's similarities or really stark differences. So there's a few studies starting to really investigate and to understand this. So if you're starting to see this, potentially, I like to think when media covers research that they'll highlight this, but the studies are small. There's some limitations, and they tend to really look at people who have been hospitalized with migraine disease. So a different subset of your average person living with migraine disease and headache-related disorders, because they're looking at what they can study in a specific hospital and trying to better understand that relationship. So we might be having a very different chat about this topic in a couple years as we learn more, but to just recognize we're still disentangling what that relationship could be, and to remember that the relationship doesn't always mean that it's causation. There's all these other things, the 90% that we can do in our lifestyle, which I'm sure at this point you're really curious, since I've mentioned that, of what are those factors. So on your screen, I try to summarize the two large studies that we have about brain health risk. We get that from the Lancet report and another meta analysis. And we do have this available as a one-page PDF and reference point that we can easily send to anyone here who's interested. It's also available on some of our social media to download. But if you want to just quickly look at this, I'm going to ask you to focus on the colors. So up at the top, you see people in the middle. The ones in your light blue are brain health risk related to your brain. The darker blue, if you're thinking your lower half, is where we're looking at the body. And our brain and body does not exist in isolation. It's in an environment that we're living in. And so those are the gray ones that you see on the side. So I just want to spend a few moments to highlight what we know are these brain health risk factors. And the relationship to dementia is we know if we can control these risk factors, we can decrease up to 40% of global rates of dementia. So it's very important to highlight our brain health. We're understanding how it looks in other specific disease states, but it's also for us living in a migraine community, we might have more level of awareness to being in tune with our brain, being in tune with our bodies, and knowing what risk we're trying to mitigate as we're living with a chronic disease that we're managing. And so if you look at those top ones in the blue, it will be your level of education and or your cognitive activity. How do you continue to stimulate your brain in meaningful ways? How do you learn things that are new, novel, and challenging and do it beyond typical school or just a class? Is this something you're continuously seeking out? Helps build a more robust brain. We see that when we can protect our brains, this is more from head injuries and head traumas. We get one brain. We want to protect it as our most valuable resource. So doing what we can there. I'm sure it's no surprise to our migraine community that sleep is so important to our health and well-being as well as our brain health. And we see a lot of relationships with or comorbidities, multiple diagnoses among people living with migraine disease when it's coming to sleep or depression, as well as when you're heading down to your body where we're looking at some of these chronic disease states and the relationships. A lot of people have multiple health diagnoses that they're managing in addition to living with migraine disease or related headache disorders. So the ones that come to the forefront when it comes to your brain health or your heart health, your hypertension or your blood pressure, having a healthy weight control, your diabetes, eliminating smoking and alcohol use, as well as putting yourself at risk if you don't maintain some level of physical activity. For a long time, we've talked about people who are physically inactive or couch potatoes are linked with smokers as taking their lives in their own hands. But we likely know our movement may need to look different for us and it can ebb and flow. But this is the idea of having movement in some way part of your lifestyle and not being completely sedentary the majority of your time. So where can you have those trade-offs to add in a little activity? Those are the ones that really come online for brain health and wellness. And the one right at the top above people, I like to just point out, I say is stress. It's the whole mind-body system. Everything we do in our systems are really down to the cellular level impacted by stress in some way. So stress can have profound impacts on our health and our well-being. And the other more recent ones, as we are in our environment, and you will likely hear, are air pollution, secondhand smoke, and social isolation. We have learned since the mid 1940s with the World Health Organization's definition of health that you want it to include your mental, your physical, and your social health. When we are socially isolated, we're at risk. It can be as detrimental to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So the power of people and community to help us thrive and live our happiest, healthiest lives are a key component of our brain health and wellness. And so I just wanted to highlight those key ones of what are those risk factors. And I can tell you there is a body of literature behind nutrition. There's a body of literature behind lots of other aspects of our health and well-being that show it's good. It's not necessarily come online when the big researchers and teams meet to look at dementia prevention, but we know those other things play a role, like our nutrition, relaxing, meditation, breath work. Those are all fantastic for our brain health and as well as our migraine health, but they're not necessarily on the risk factor list. So I wanted to hone in on the risk factor list for tonight, but let you know there are many other things supported by a lot of research that can help us manage brain health as well as migraine health. And I'd like to just introduce our acronym that we use at our center as brain care. So it can be very overwhelming to hear all these different risk factors, and some of them may apply to you, other ones may not, but it's the idea of where to start and what can you do. And our recommendation is always to pick one, but if you're looking at our brain care acronym is brain care is your self-care, it's going to lead to your brain health management as well as your migraine health management. Looking for balance, taking breaks, prioritizing sleep and our restfulness. Our attitude has a great impact on our health and our well-being. So practicing gratitude, that intellectual engagement again, keeping our minds mentally stimulated, learning new and different things. Nourishing things. I'd like to think this is one where the migraine community has a better understanding of how hydration and how nutrition impacts the brain and supports our optimal health in comparison to other populations where they're not necessarily having to think about, I ate this, how am I feeling now? Let alone when it's involving your headache management or your cognitive function, we tend to have higher awareness on this. And if we move to that care component, we're looking at ways we connect, what we're aspiring to do, what is our health goal that we want to make realistic and achievable. And that we remember too is if we're managing chronic health conditions, it's a journey. That's why we kind of have this like a roadway. It's a journey. It's not a sprint, and our needs may change when we ebb and flow. We can get a really bad migraine episode, or we could be in status migraine, and things change for us in those moments of time compared to when we're not having as much pain or a decrease in our frequency of our headaches. So keeping that in mind, that we can remember that this is a daily practice and something small we can do all the time. And then adding in that physical exercise kind of ends up that brain care model. So the last thing I wanted to share about all these topics is a common question we get asked. You've heard all these risk factors. You likely are aware of some of these self-care routines. So how does this fit in your daily life? What can you do tomorrow or maybe today, depending on your time zone, that can still nurture your own brain health and wellness? So we sat down and looked at the research and looked at the bare minimum intervals that we can spend our time on something to show an impact on our health and well-being. So we created this to say, if you only spend 30 minutes a day, that's what you can start with or build up to. Where do you want to invest your time for your optimal brain health or migraine health? And you're going to look at some way to unplug, some way for your restfulness. Meditation and breath work changes the brain, changes the body at the cellular level, and can be very powerful. And we know we can see positive impacts on our health with just a few minutes. You can grow and nurture a breathwork practice as well as a meditation practice to be in longer intervals, but you can start small and start to see how that is having an impact on you. You want to spend about 10 minutes engaging in that mental exercise as well as physical exercise. So those are your two 10-minute intervals, and you know you can always build from that. So we find even from research from the CDC, just 5 minutes of physical movement can start to offer us health benefits. So on days that may be tough or challenging, if we can just find small ways to add in that movement, it's still having gains for our health. And we can start small and build big. Same way with taking a brain break, we see the power in not running full speed ahead 24 hours a day, but taking those moments to take a break. And our community may be also more aware of this one, of there's just times where we we stop and unplug or reset, but also planning in times where we might want to do that so that we can continue to do things that bring us joy and the tasks that we have at hand. So, seeing where you need to fold in some breaks to help nurture your energy levels and nurture your health and your well being. And the last one's a minute of gratitude. I know I said 30 minutes, but I like to think the gratitude one you can fold in to some existing part of your wellness routine. When you're washing your hands, think about what's gone well that day. What are you grateful for? You may do this in the morning, in the evening if you're sharing a meal with someone, but this is something that can be done pretty quickly that can help us change a more positive mindset, and that kind of trickles downhill to improving our overall health and our well-being. So this is also a handout that we can have available to show you if you want to spend 30 minutes a day, where you can kind of invest, or maybe there's one area on here you didn't really think of, and that's where you can start. But research is supporting all of these recommendations in these time intervals as the starting point. We can always build and spend more time moving our bodies, engaging the brain, unplugging with meditation and relaxation. So I hope that will be helpful to everyone this evening. And I know we're coming into the last part, which is the big lingering question about brain fog and medications. And it's so complicated. And so I just want to share it was one that actually brought me out of talking mostly about brain health in my professional world. That's what I was doing. But then I realized navigating and living with migraine disease that I have brain fog. I couldn't always put a word on it, but I could describe some of the side effects of what I was experiencing when I was trying different medications that was either helping on the prevention side or the abortive side to my own care, and learning that any med you take just about has some type of cognitive side effect profile. And so for us to have to tune in and see what is different in our body, and I know how about you have plenty of tools that can help us track this, right? When we're trying a new medication. But to keep in mind, there may be entire classes of medications that have different profiles, especially when it comes to our cognitive functioning. When we're thinking about the brain fog haze, kind of is the way I hear a lot of people say it, but it's the lack of clarity, the lack of your mental focus, perhaps issues with your attention as well. And so we realize that can be very startling to us, like with confusion. And my perfect example I had was, I think, with my first healthcare provider when I started on Topamax and had all these side effects and when I'm talking about them, and moved on to a different healthcare provider who later shared what I think a lot of people in our migraine community may know, but was news to me at the time, is Topamax is called Dopamax because it makes you dopey. And that was kind of the running joke. And at the time, that just made me feel better because I felt like in my own experience with what I was living with and was trying to articulate to someone else, that there was a mismatch. Because to me, it's like I couldn't do much without it being written on a piece of paper, having notepads everywhere. And then I was more vigilant of thinking I was forgetting something because I was knowing. I had that level of awareness of knowing it was beyond my norm. And changing medications and luckily not having those side effects can be a big difference. But for other people, there's many other classes of medications that may still cause some of these cognitive dysfunctions for us. And I think that's what we were going to spend some time talking about, but at least to lay the groundwork and the generalities is it's very hard to try any medication and not recognize that not only does it have side effect profile for your cognition, but on various areas of your body. And so what it is that we need to do to tune in to our bodies or our brains. And at the bottom of the screen, I learned this from a movement therapist and kind of resonated with me, but in a different way for tonight's talk, is taking ownership and knowing only we know what it's like to live in our body and our brain when we're living with migraine disease. And so when we have to advocate or have those conversations, to get the skills or the knowledge to be able to do that and to not dismiss ourselves, that if we're thinking, oh, something's not right, maybe it's not one of the main side effects of a medication, it's a secondary side effect, or one when you dig really deep into these pharmacological studies was you know, other people share, but it was like less than half of 1%, or, these fractions of a percentage, but you're not the only one out there. It's just not necessarily all that information that's mainstream that you're thinking of. So to honor what your body and your brain are telling you when you're trying medications, supplements, lifestyle modifications, to remember to take some time to tune in, and then to start those conversations with providers, people of your community or loved ones, people that are part of your team and wanting to support your optimal well-being. That was really where I ended on the meds, Heba, because I know we were going to chat about it. I didn't see.
And I think
I
we
see.
are our streaming service is not showing us the comments, but I'm able to go on Facebook and I can see a lot of comments there. So I can give you
Oh,
some comments. But I think we went to brain fog because this is the one, me as a pharmacist, I hear most, where I'm told that, the feeling. I hear all sorts. I mean, I haven't heard Dopamax, or Dopamax, but I have heard I feel like a zombie. I can't remember things. I cannot really focus. I feel like I'm walking all day and I don't remember what I did or where I was. Or I hear a lot of comments, not only with Topamax but with others, and I also hear a lot of people saying, well, my doctor says that doesn't happen with this medication. And I love your comment around, well, all medications at one point or another will have an effect, and listening to your body and trusting that what you feel is what you feel, is your own experience. Just because I'm like, I don't live with migraines, so I cannot tell you what the medication does to me because I haven't taken it also in the middle of a migraine attack. A lot of the studies that were done, they were just clinical trials. They were trying to capture the most common in the beginning. And a lot of these medications that we now have were not even developed for migraine. So
mhm.
brain fog is the one that I guess the community has really talked a lot about. I can see some of these comments. I have someone says, I'm on Topamax and feel that, but it has helped with my migraine. So that
Mhm.
is also very important, because it is still that choice that you make. What can you tolerate best, or how can
Mhm.
you, there's a trade-off. If it's a little bit of brain fog that you're able to cope with, still function with, that's okay, because you need to be also pain free, or at least you need to manage your pain to be able to go forward. I'm just going to
I'm
remove.
glad you, I was going to say, I'm actually really glad you shared that. I was on Topamax for quite a while, and I learned some different things. What I was actually able to articulate to my provider, other than feeling the dopey and the fog, it was realizing the interval of which we were increasing my dose was too high. So I had to go to a smaller one, and then that helped with the cognitive symptoms. And again, it was helping with my migraine management. So it was that decision and that trade off. And I've also talked with other providers, another neurologist at the time, who even shared ways to use that when traveling. So Topamax is one you can use a little differently when you travel, which I cannot give the recommendation for, but I at least knew when I spoke with my provider, they have different insights from all the patient populations they're managing, what they know in their knowledge, and there's different ways to utilize some of the tools that may already be part of our daily use in what we're doing. So think that's an important part of the conversation, and knowing it is a balancing act, as well as where you might be on insurance. I had one where it's they want you to take it for 3 months, but my face swelled up, my eye, my whole cheek, my whole right side, and I thought, I am not going to inject myself with this for 2 more months to decide if it works. It was just a really hard decision because you're hoping for something to work, but I thought my body really didn't like it, and I wasn't comfortable again because it took a long time. So, of course, it was a very rare side effect. They hadn't had a patient at that point at the Cleveland Clinic that really reported it, and I thought, well, I'm going to be the first one to share, and I have embarrassing pictures if I needed to, but it was having to find that tricky balance, and it is hard. And I honor everyone who does do that, but there's a lot of great providers who have different insights for what you can do. on the pharmacological side, but also some of the things on the lifestyle to bring things full circle for yourself.
Well, and again, just because it's rare, if it happens to you, it's 100%. You're 100% sure it happens, right? Just because it's a point or 1% in the literature, but if it happened to me, that's 100%. It happens. So it's good that we continue to trust ourselves, and most important, and that's something as a pharmacist I always say: report, report, report. Just because it
Mhm.
happened and someone says, well, that's not related to the medication, if you look at what the definition of side effects and post marketing reporting and all of that is, that once a product is in use and some things happen that are not reported, when you report it, you're able to help other people, that they don't get also dismissed by their care providers or by people around them, going like, no, it doesn't happen with this medication. I have a
Mhm.
lot of questions, so I'm gonna go back a little bit and start
Oh,
talking about risk factors and modifiable risk factors. I cannot um, I cannot control pollution, but we can control other things. So one of
mhm.
the questions was around sugar and how too much sugar can actually um, influence or affect your cognition. What about people who have low sugar levels? The question is, does that also affect your brain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because there's a lot of information coming online about glucose and your metabolic health, and finding out that yes, there's these norm levels, but they might look a little different for us. And those of us with different health conditions may respond differently. I would say talk with your healthcare provider about that. I remember a few years ago when I started on my migraine journey and they do my test, like my glucose level was very low for even what he thought. He's like, this is not normal. So I had to find some different tools and things to do at the time. And now that's not necessarily the case, but at the point in time, it was running very low. So you can have both extremes where you're very low or you're very high. But seeing what you can do in the normal range, and I would say talk with your providers because they're really going to know that whole picture about how to really give you individualized recommendations, because we have these global ones, but that doesn't always work, especially for people managing chronic health conditions. Or to your point, when you're running low, that's going to look different than someone who's running high and having these big glucose spikes and then they're dropping off more frequently. So talk with your providers. And of course, when you're seeing those things, to see what it is you could do. At the time, I remember for myself, it was smaller meals with a little bit more protein because it was different for me, but that helped because I kept thinking they weren't related, but I realized it did play a role in my headache management.
And this is one of the things that we do. I mean, as I've already explained to you with the Migraine Pharmacy Network, what we
Mm-hmm.
do the actual medication review, but we also do a self-care plan. And in the self-care plan, diet is a big portion of that. Hydration, making sure you're hydrated, not only with water, but even the electrolytes. Your diet, do not skip meals. Never skip meals. It's not a good idea for someone living with migraine to skip meals, because that will cause all these fluctuations in blood sugar. And then we know that research is coming back and saying keto diet, and that's higher protein diet, high protein, low sugar. People who tend to start this diet, they do see an improvement in their symptoms or in the way that they are able to manage their migraine headaches. Um, but the question I have for you around diet, we also see all these health
Mm-hmm.
products that say, this is proved to make you smart and improve your
Mm-hmm.
cognition, and that is one of these questions that, like, all of us want to buy these that make me super smart and super focused. But what do you think of that?
No, that that's been a great question that's been following along in the field, especially down the aging care continuum. We had a couple supplement companies get audited by the FDA in places, and it wasn't necessarily their product, it was the way they marketed. So they made big claims that you can have gains in your memory and your energy, and then there's no studies, there's no populations, they're not regulated the same as our pharmaceuticals. And so that got them into a lot of trouble. So I'd like to say if something sounds too good to be true, it likely is. And if you start poking around, you'll see all these big disclaimers and things. But there's a lot of what we can do through our diet, through nutrition, through supplements with our healthcare providers. I think there's some common ones many people with migraine disease may already be on. But to work individually with your provider as well as your pharmacist is a great resource to find the supplements that you may need that can help support your care. And you can spend a lot of money on supplements, and it doesn't mean it's not going to fix a bad diet. It's kind of like that balance of you may need it because you're low on certain vitamin deficiencies and those things, or a big one in our community and even for the brain tends to be magnesium. So
Yes.
that supplement plays a role, but it's still not negating the fact you don't want to consume magnesium rich foods or foods with healthy fats for yourself. So I hope that can be helpful. Unfortunately, I haven't seen enough research, or really even at conferences heard people talk about one end all be all supplement, especially under the brain health one. They've made a lot of claims and they got in a lot of trouble for not having the research behind those claims. But you'll still see them on Amazon, and you can buy them for $90 to $120 a bottle. So at some point we'll regulate how, I guess, we share those out with people. Like, we can hope.
Well, the other thing as a pharmacist we see is a lot of these, just because they're natural or say herbal or say whatever, they do interact with your medications that are prescribed. So just because they're on the shelf, it doesn't mean that they will not interact with something that you're already taking. Some of them cause bleeding disorders or cause stomach problems or make your medication more concentrated or less concentrated, like build up in your body or actually not work. And always the easiest thing you can do is just go to the pharmacist and say, hey, I want to buy this. Can you look at my profile and tell me if this actually interacts with any of my medications? And it's a free service. So please leverage it. Go to your pharmacist, build
Mm-hmm.
that relationship. And we like to know this. Like me, myself, every time someone asks me about an interaction in the pharmacy and I found out something new, it meant that I can help more people. So it's a win-win. You will get to get individualized and personalized information about a supplement, but also your pharmacist is going to learn something new. So go ahead and ask the pharmacist. I'm going to go
No, I
back.
think I was going to
Sorry.
say, I'm just glad you shared that, because a lot of the times it's really hard. The brochure you get for a medication, the font's so small and there's all these things, but for some medications, there are nuances for when they're to be administered, what you want to take or not take when you're with them, like food, even certain beverages. And your pharmacist is a great resource to that, as well as the healthcare provider sometimes prescribing it. But usually a pharmacy tends to get like the first calls when something like that's happening or what you need to know. And so it is great. I'm not sure that all the time we read through all those pamphlets we get when we're prescribed a medication. We have the general idea, but it's very tough to get through. They're very dense, and it's very easy to overlook something small that still can have an impact. Of like some of them I know with juices, especially grapefruit juice, it doesn't work well to take with them, but if that's part of your day-to-day routine, you wouldn't be aware. So to ask those questions and tap into the valuable resources we have available to us.
I think another question that I saw on Facebook was around menopause, migraine, cognition. We're already, we are seeing more and more brain fog. And when menopause is added to that, a lot of the women in the community ask, well, what can I do? What can I do with this extra burden, I'm going to say, of having to deal with all these changes that not only affect your body, but also affect your brain? What do you think?
And
What do
yeah,
you recommend?
I recommend Lisa, I'm going to say her name wrong, Dr. Lisa Moscati's book, The XX Brain, because she takes the deep dive into the female brain, and it's much more knowledgeable, even her TED talk, in comparison to what I can share. But from what I do know is we're still trying to understand the sex-based differences of the brain. And we know there's pivotal time points like menopause where it looks different for women. And we already know we are disproportionately impacted as women with migraine disease. with multiple sclerosis, with other brain-based diseases, even dementia. 2 out of 3 are women being diagnosed. So we're really starting to understand what we know, the limits and data that we had as well before women were even included in research, or that we even looked of, are there differences between males and females? And so I'd like to say there's some great brain health initiatives that are really digging deep into those questions with those researchers. But I recommend her book and website or her TED Talk, because she's really started to take the dive in that, as well as Dr. Sarah Mackay out of Australia. They have published the 2 most recent books on women and brain health, and a lot of it does come around our child rearing years into menopause, and then even post menopause, because trajectories for migraine headache and frequency can look different at those times. But also they really dive deep on the role that hormones can play, or the limits of what we know about hormones, because I'm sure we hear a lot about that. That's usually the first thing they say if you're female. Oh, it's your hormones. But there's still a lot more to that story, and they have great knowledge bases and resources to find that out.
So, but if you were going to give us one advice that helps with brain fog, does it exist even? That one advice, one
Yeah.
thing that I can do to cope with brain fog, and possibly um, I'm not gonna say get rid of it, but at least manage it a little bit better. Um,
Yeah, I think if I had to pick one, it's hard because so many of these factors become interconnected. I would say to work on sleep. Sleep is a basic foundation of our health, and I don't want to be discredited of, for many of us, it's impacted when we're living with migraine disease or headache disorders. But it can be a very strong root to help our brain reset. We clear out all of the waste of the day, we consolidate our memories, and we're still at the infancy of understanding all the things that sleep does for our brain and our body, but we know it does a lot. And in terms of it consolidating our memories, cleaning out the waste of the day, those are really big priorities when we're thinking about brain fog, because it's helping our brain just even be set up to be successful, to perform some of those cognitive functions that we're wanting to do, like pay pay focus to something, or really not try to divide our attention, but just those higher outputs we're asking. Sleep lets us kind of get to that solid baseline that we can build from. If I had to pick one, that's what I would say.
I, I I know that one of the things that you do a lot of advocacy around brain health and cognition and people living with dementia. So if like in the case of migraine, we find that people living with migraine have to advocate for themselves a lot,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to their performance, if they have to work, or to people around them. How do they do this? How do you explain that my brain function um, changes in the middle of a headache or a migraine attack? How do you advocate for yourself if if you have to talk to someone about this? What do you think is the best way to advocate?
Yeah, I have to honor it's for many of us, it's probably a stressful and difficult conversation, because we're thinking about how to word it. If you're in the workplace, there's some great initiatives to help support that, but we have some laws that are a little vague, at least in the US, where you have to be an employee somewhere before you can do the FMLA and have leave. So if you have status migraine, you have leave in your job secure. Under ADA, we can get some accommodations. And I could say I worked with my neurologist, because at first I thought, I want to do well. I want to do well at my job. I want to thrive. But if I'm under fluorescent lighting, I cannot do well. I can start in that morning, and by 10 a.m., I am sick. And so I had to work with my neurologist, who was a great resource to help me articulate what are some small practical things that I could do. And I could say they came back with this whole list of like, well, this is very reasonable, so that I could have that conversation with my workplace, or to have that. And really, what we find in general is most of the things we're asking for are very low cost. It benefits most people, because whether you have migraine or not, fluorescent lighting can be draining on what it is you're trying to do. There's certain filters, and maybe being in a more quiet workspace or an environment. But at the same time, employers in theory want you to thrive. And so when they can set up those environments, but I would say initially, I wasn't sure what I was asking for. And then as I worked with my neurologist and they helped give me some suggestions, then I knew more of the tangible items. And I was also more informed on what are my rights? What are my rights as someone living with a disability who wants to be a contributing member of the workplace? Or I'm at this point where I can still contribute to the workplace. What are my rights so that I can be set up for success, just like anyone else with some other type of disability that whether you can see it or not, minimal things can still let people be productive and thrive to the best of their abilities. So I'd like to honor that that's a very difficult and challenging situation, but if you work with your healthcare providers, they've likely helped a lot of other people navigate this. They have the resources, they have the paperwork, and they'll support you in the documentation with your request too.
I think I have one more question. We're
Okay.
almost, we have 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes to go.
Sure.
So I'm just gonna pose this one where I'm seeing this in my own practice where a lot of people are coming back and saying COVID and my cognition. So COVID, migraine plus um, yeah, COVID plus migraine and cognitive health or brain health. What do you think? Are there any studies? Is there anything coming up or coming out on this?
I think that's a great question. I could say in my initial search, I didn't see anything. Doesn't mean they're not coming or coming through the process. But I know from myself, I recently completed the American Migraine Foundation advocacy training program. So working with other people or providers in this migraine space and realized there were some commonalities. Many people who lived with migraine disease who had COVID, it kind of rocked the boat for them. And is the nicest way I could say it. It changed a lot of things that was their normal routine or their maintenance plan. A lot of people, whatever medications they were on the prevention and abortive side, were no longer working. So it was like back to the drawing board again of what I could do. And it's this flip side too, as well as I believe from my experiences in the long COVID space, is those are conversations people are really hesitant to have, as well as providers to say, is it long COVID or is it not long COVID? The criteria isn't as cut and dry, but we're able to articulate things that look different. And what I've seen with kind of a wide variety of symptoms with long COVID, headaches do come on board, but it tends to be a different type of headache. I haven't heard in the chat so much about it being related to migraine onset or anything for people who didn't necessarily have it before. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but headaches is usually one of those leading factors along with fatigue and brain fog. And so if you were living with a brain-based condition or disease that you were managing, as well as people autoimmune who went through COVID, the presentation of your disease or condition afterwards may have been altered. And that's what we're seeing through different patient population groups, at least, people talking to one another and learning that. So I'm not sure how long it will take for our research to really reflect that, considering on the whole bigger picture, our systems are reluctant to point out how big the long COVID issue is and how long it will be around. It's not going to go away. It's our brain, but there's a lot of things we can change and do to nurture it. But it is, what are those recommendations? What's the dose of those recommendations? And a lot of it is lifestyle. But what are those changes and how can we support people along that way?
I think when we started talking, me and you, one of the things I explained is how fascinated I am with that. Years ago, when I went to school, they told us once you lose your brain cell, that's the only cell that does not grow back. Like you don't get new ones. You're born with a certain number, and
Mm-hmm.
that certain number actually depletes, and you don't get new ones. And then a few years ago, I was very happily surprised when all the research was saying, no, 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 you can have new cells, but most important is the new pathways that you can actually build
Mm-hmm.
between existing cells. So even if we're not building as many as we have lost, or we're not producing as many new brain cells as the ones we've lost, we are able to utilize the ones we have a little bit better by building um, neuronal pathways that help us overcome our brain aging or our cognitive decline that comes with aging, or that comes with significant trauma, or that comes with different things. What do you think about this? What is your take on this?
I think it's been one of the more exciting things to learn is, we're not necessarily stuck with the brains we have. And through intentional lifestyle, the way we're living, activities we're seeking out, how we're spending our leisure time, we get to mold and sculpt our brains to an extent. So much like you said, you can grow the new neurons, we're working with those pathways, but meditation does that. Exercise, physical movement does that. The mental stimulation does. And so it's linking how I'm spending my time in this activity, what it's doing to my brain, and then how is that linking to my overall health. And it's very exciting. I like to say it's not necessarily a perfect science, because you'll see people who are very healthy still end up with some brain-based diseases or even dementia, but it presents a little differently because they've built up what we call is that cognitive reserve. So that bank where you buffer your decline, because you've built up more neurons, more neural pathways. So you're able to, I don't want to say, kind of work around things where that pathway may have went around and still access that information or still perform that task, whatever that neural pathway was for. And so I think the idea and the notion of cognitive reserve is exciting. It's always part of our conversation with brain health. But what really, for me, I take away is the way we're spending our time with those activities. So there's studies even of people in their 90s living with dementia can grow new neurons in the area of their brain commonly associated with memory, the hippocampus, through meditation. A few weeks of meditation, 12 minutes a day. So we're starting to see how these lifestyle effects, the dose that we have, and it's not limited to whether we have a quote unquote normal healthy aging brain, or even if we're experiencing deterioration, we can still have that new neuronal growth, and we can still have that impact of how we're spending our time to help support our optimal health and our well-being. I
That
always
that
like to
sounds
share that example because we think when we're so far along that there's nothing that we could still do or control, but those healthy lifestyle factors, the way we're spending our time, the food we're eating, are all an investment, and it will have an impact, and it would look different. If we were eating a lot of fast food, it's going to look a lot different, our overall health, than when we're trying to eat less processed foods, eat more plants and vegetables, the plant slant, those types of things. We're going to see these small gains, although it's hard to quantify because it's not this huge gain that you see immediately. It's the slower, gradual pace. But I hope that will encourage people to continue with just one thing a day that you can do better for your brain health or your migraine health. And for me, there's days after having all the nausea from a migraine attack, I need to hydrate. So I need the extra electrolytes and to hydrate. And that's my one thing that day, because probably exercise isn't going to be high on the priority list. And that's just having to listen to my mind and body and honor that. But just think, what's that one small tangible thing you can do each day or trade off that supports your brain health and your migraine health? And there's probably a lot of little insights in there that you can try, but it is achievable.
and I think we have 1 minute to go. If you wanted to give us one advice going forward in our journey with migraine and people living with migraine in their journey, what would that be? What is that one advice? Again, I like the principle of one that you've just said. What would be your advice to people who want to have better brain health and better cognition living with migraine?
And yes, I appreciate you asking that question. I jumped ahead with the one thing a day, but also honoring of what you're doing for your migraine health. For us in our community, what we're managing, what we're living with, the decisions we're making, or looking to kind of be a detective and understand, that's playing a role in our brain health. So they're very interconnected. And so we can see when we make small gains or even a change in one or the other, I like to say we're supporting the brain health and migraine health. So when we're doing that It's for our own optimal health and well-being, and we're going to see those gains. Maybe not as immediately, but we know, like, you can think about dehydration. You can start feeling that in your mouth or your throat, and by the time you're already thirsty, you're usually about 2% dehydrated. So thinking about ways where you're hearing these signals, how you can tie that in to your optimal health and well-being. And so knowing it all is going to support your migraine plan, your life with migraine, as well as your migraine management.
Thank you very much. I know I asked you this yesterday because I said, how can I find out more if I want to take full advantage of this expertise and of what you do for people, um, you know, to maintain their brain health? I know you told me that you're the virtual brain um, uh, center that you work with actually offers a lot of free resources to people who would like to take care of their brain. Can you just tell us a little bit more? And where can
Oh,
people
sure.
find you?
Yeah, luckily we tried to be simple. It's virtualbrainhealthcenter.com. And we have information on a wide variety of brain health topics. The infographics that I shared as part of the slide, we have available to download. So it's kind of a one-page tool that can summarize brain health for you or your action steps. And if there's nothing available on there, you can email us. I'll be sure to get you anything that we saw this evening. And the email's info@virtualbrainhealthcenter.com. But we aim to be a resource around brain health and wellness. And if you have questions, our goal is to get you the resource that will be the most supportive to you in that time. And so we do offer that available as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It has been a pleasure to have Dr. Crystal Kaller come and talk to us about brain health and cognition. It's always a pleasure to listen to all these ideas that might change our lives. Small changes that we can embrace in our lives that will have an impact. This is not only for people living with migraine, but thank you, Migraine Canada, for giving us the opportunity to talk today and to share this information with people living with migraine. Not only in Canada, I know we have had some. I can see that we are broadcasting to a few platforms, and I see that we have people joining us from other places. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you after the new year. Happy holidays. I hope that you have a good time with your family, loved ones, and I will see you next year where we will continue the Ask Your Pharmacist. Again, Dr. Kaller, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you here tonight.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who tuned in with the great questions and for their gift of presence to talk about brain health and migraine health. I hope you can feel empowered to use this information in your day-to-day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.